Have you ever wanted to build yourself a guitar stand but couldn't quite figure out how to do it? Well, that's because you don't know Dick. Hi, I'm Dick, and I'm going to show you how I built this guitar stand out of a 2-foot piece of 1x6 pine, a 2-inch loose pin hinge, and a piece of self-adhesive felt. Here we go. The first thing you want to do with any material you buy from the lumber store is to square off the edge. Next, hook up your measuring tape and measure 11 7/8 of an inch. When you're cutting this material, make sure you cut on the left side of the line. I usually make a mark. You're going to have to do this twice, as you'll need 2 pieces to make both sides of the stand. Next, you're going to have to measure each piece and make a mark at 2 3/8 of an inch from the left side. Then, set the table of your compound miter saw to 12 degrees. Square up the piece of wood to your fence, line up your saw blade, and make your cut. With your 2 pieces of 11 7/8 material cut, simply separate them, flip one end over, and you can see what the stand's going to start to look like. I'm going to describe these pieces. You have a back brace, you have a foot, you're going to have a cut edge, and you're going to have a factory edge along with a heel. I'm going to refer to these while we're making the stand so it'll be easier to follow. It's also important to know the depth of your guitar so that when you're setting the back brace on the foot, you have enough room for the guitar. This is going to vary from guitar to guitar. For example, if you do an electric, this space will be a lot smaller. For most acoustics, 6 1/4 inch is a perfect size. You're going to need a stop on the end of the foot. Typically, I make that out of a piece of 3/4 inch stock, cut it to 3/4 of an inch in length, and then I glue it to the end of the foot. Next, measure the center of the back brace. It's going to be approximately 2 3/8 of an inch to the center. Transfer that mark to the foot. To join the 2 pieces together, I'm going to use my biscuit joiner. I'm going to mark the center of my foot and my back brace to make sure that they line up with the cutter on the biscuit joiner. For safety, it's always a good idea to clamp down the piece of material you're going to be working on. It's important to line up the center line of your biscuit joiner to the mark on your board. Once you've made the cut, check your biscuit to make sure it goes in about halfway. Repeat this procedure for the back brace as well. Before you glue the 2 pieces together, double check your measurements to make sure there's enough room for the guitar that you're building the stand for. Mark the position of the back brace on the foot. This will help you when you're applying glue later. I also like to use parchment paper to help keep glue off my workbench. Make sure you apply enough glue into the joint so that when you place the biscuit into it, you'll have some squeeze out. Brush the excess glue on the face of the foot in between the 2 marks you made earlier, as well as to the biscuit. Fill the back brace cut and assemble the 2 pieces. Make sure to align the pieces where you want before you clamp them. Stop! Hang on a minute. I know what you're thinking. Hey Dick, I don't have a biscuit joiner. No problem, there is another way. It takes a little longer. I'll show you how it's done. Let me back up a bit. I'm going to use a 5/16 by 1.5 inch dowel to join the 2 pieces together. Remember, you only want to drill 3/4 of an inch into each piece. To do this, I'm using a 5/16 brad point bit, and I'll be marking it with a piece of tape at 3/4 of an inch. Next, I'm going to mark the back brace. I'm going to stay back about 1 inch to 1.5 inches from the factory as well as the cut edge. I'm going to double check my measurement to make sure that the back brace is located on the foot where I want it. Then I'm going to line up the foot and the back brace and transfer the marks from the back brace to the foot. I'm going to stand up the foot and transfer those marks to the short edge. I'll do the same thing with the back brace. Next, I'll mark the center of the 3/4 inch edge, which will be about 3/8 of an inch. Then I'll clamp my material and drill the holes. Try to make sure your drill is level and square to the material, and don't go deeper than the tape. Dry fit the pieces to make sure everything goes together the way you want it to, and if it does, glue it together and clamp it. I'm just going to add a note here. Make sure that when you're gluing these two pieces together, that the factory edge of the back brace is facing towards the long side of the foot. Otherwise, the angle of the stand will be wrong. I like to use a couple of additional clamps to make sure all the edges stay in line. If you've got a bit of extra glue because of the squeeze out, you can wipe it off now, or you can sand it off later. Remember that little 3/4 inch square you cut? Well, now's a good time to glue it to the foot as well. Don't forget to line up the grains, otherwise it'll look bad. I like to use a high-tack adhesive tape and a clamp to keep the edges straight. I usually like to let the glue sit for at least an hour before I remove the clamps. So things don't get too confusing, I like to mark the left side and the right side of the stand, because there are 2 more cuts to be made, and each one of them is different to each side. If we put the 2 pieces of the stand together, this is what we end up with. This is what we want to end up with. So you can see the sides are very different. I'm going to mark a 45-degree angle on the cut side of the left side of the stand. I'm going to transfer this mark and take it over to my compound miter saw. I want to make sure that the factory edge is going towards the fence. I happen to have a sub fence, so I need to move it out of the way. Next, I'll have to set the blade at a 45-degree angle. I tilt it to the left, line up my mark, and make the cut. To make the cut on the right side of the stand, I have to bring the saw blade back up to 22.5 degrees. Again, you want to make sure that the factory edge is going towards the fence. Make this cut with the blade lining up to the very edge. Now when you set up the pieces together, they should look like this. Now that all the cutting's done, it's time to sand out any rough edges and any excess glue. I'll start with an orbital sander and finish any other imperfections by hand. Once you're finished sanding, you can put your hinge on. I like to use a loose pin 2-inch hinge. I want to be able to remove the pin so I can put each piece on either side of the stand easily. To make sure I locate the hinges on the proper side of the stand, I like to mark them. The left side hinge gets measured 1/4 inch from the factory edge and 1 inch down from the short side of the 45-degree cut that you made earlier. The right side gets measured 1/4 inch from the factory edge and 2 inches down from the long side of the cut. With both sides of the hinges installed, it's simply a matter of putting the stand together, inserting the pin, and then tapping it in. You now have a collapsible guitar stand. Now it's time to add the felt. I usually put this at the contact points where I believe the body of the guitar will touch the stand. I start by marking a 3/4 inch piece and then cut 8 pieces, 4 for each side of the stand. Because the felt has a self-adhesive backing, there's no need for glue. There's one other place that I like to put a piece of felt, and that's at the top where the back of the guitar will come in contact with the stand. Of course, you can always stain or paint your stand to help protect the wood. It's up to you. Well, that's how I did it, but if you're like me, you probably own more than one guitar, so I've got to start building another one.